So that there was a lockbox, you know, and I asked a member whether the lockbox had turned into a grip that no longer locks. What has happened? Is there money in the lockbox? Somebody said it's only $2 million. The CIP, estimated revenue for the CIP was $45 million for this year in the estimates of expenditure. Are there other source of funds available so that we could cushion the impact on the future of the NIC? It is a very serious matter at this point in time, recognizing our demographics, what is happening to our population, how many persons will be working in future contributing. And Madam President, the other very important point, as I understand it today, the main contributors to the NIC at this point in time are persons working in the tourism sector. Whereas they have a right to receive support because they have contributed, the foundation of the NIC is farming. Persons who work. And when tourism at this point in time is suffering, and the future for tourism looks kind of bleak, you ask, where will the resources come from in future to support the NIC? Madam President, I think any government at this point in time looking towards supporting persons through the NIC is noble, is good. But we need to do that with every bit of care. We must encourage persons who are employed through the other non-structured employment, like the construction workers, to contribute. They do so, they must do so under the law requires, but some of them have no way of doing it except make the contribution themselves. How will they feel comfortable if we do not provide information for those persons to willingly contribute their funds into the NIC? Madam President, it's important that we manage at this point in time, in this crisis, a responsible approach in using the NIC to provide the economic relief, but at the same time provide information and make it clear and transparent that we do not affect persons who want to continue to view the NIC as a place that will rescue us in our twilight years. Madam President, it's also important, very important, that we consider the NIC in terms of link it to some of what we have discussed previously. Like I said, the NIC, they have supported us in time past. The NIC is the main contributor toward the National Community Foundation. It is the parent of the National Community Foundation that has provided support to St. Lucians over the years. Madam President, while I was at the NCF for about 15 years, I know the NIC has taken steps to reduce its contribution to the NCF. Although the NCF is the is the main agency providing to poor and vulnerable people in the areas of health and education. And Madam President, I dare say, for the years the NCF has existed, the persons who have received support from the NCF, they are only for life-threatening situations. Life-threatening situation. In layman terms, if you're going to prevent you from dying, the NCF has been providing that support. Yet, the NIC over the years has seen reason to reduce its contribution to the NCF, National Community Foundation. At one time, they asked the NCF to even pay rent. They remove us from waterfront, and the NCF is now on High Street. So I'm saying that without having details from the NIC, I have reasons to believe that the NIC have taken a sort of a cautious attitude towards its resources in time past. And what has happened in the economy thus far to give the NIC the sort of brazen confidence when we have evidence that our population has inversed for the future. We have all of the writings on the wall that tells us that the future is not we cannot be very optimistic about certain things, and the adjustments need to be made. With all of this, Madam President, while we support, we are asking the government to provide information, evidence, documentation, so that St. Lucians, when we speak on behalf of St. Lucians, they will continue to maintain their confidence in the NCF and the NIC, especially those persons who voluntarily make their contribution and contribute significantly to the health of that entity. Because I speak here, Madam President, as a contributor, and I'm telling you, Madam President, I support the contribution, but I'm also concerned that when it's time for retirement, I do not want for them to extend it 5 years later. I know they will not be meeting me at that time. So I'm asking, Madam President, that we consider this, because personally, all of us who have to look to the NIC for our retirements will want to ensure that it maintains some sort of financial help to respond in our time of trouble. Thank you very much.
Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to share a few thoughts on the current to share a few thoughts on the current matter before the House. First of all, I believe that the effort is well intended. It is to give relief to persons who are affected by the current COVID-19 situation. And like I said when I spoke earlier, any effort that the government is going to make to bring relief to persons who are affected by this situation should be welcome and should be supported. However, we must ensure that we manage the process well. Madam President, we know the importance of NIC as perhaps the most comprehensive social security program that we have for our people. Most St. Lucians now contribute to it. And in our latter years, many of us will recognize how important it is. And so, as a country, we must ensure that we manage the business of the NIC well enough so that in times like these and in difficult times or when it is needed most, that it is available. So, Madam President, one of the things I want to mention is how we've been looking at the sequence of events. We are here today to make the amendments to the legislation. But I think we need to be careful that we do not find ourselves rushing to do things because we did not plan. The Prime Minister would have come during one of his briefings or addresses to the nation and make certain pronouncements. Announce that certain organizations or certain groups will get this and who will get that. So people become optimistic and their expectations raised. And then we rush to Parliament to try to make the amendments to make it work. Madam President, sometimes I have to question the quality of leadership in that regard. It sounds very reactionary to me. And earlier on, my colleague, Senator, the Minister in the Ministry of Tourism, made reference to leadership. Madam President, in a situation like this, that is what you need. Good leadership. Not reactionary. Some people refer to it as AA leadership. AA, we have to do that. AA, we run to do this. We have to be comprehensive in our planning. Madam President, I also am very concerned about what alternatives we have as a nation to NIC. Because today, it seems that this is all we have. We're coming to the NIC that already has its fair share of concerns to rescue us and to rescue our workers who are affected by COVID-19. As a country, we need to begin to look at alternatives. And when I stand in this honorable house to identify concerns and problems we have with what we do, I often try to offer alternative suggestions. Now, I am no economist. I think we have a very good one in this honorable house. That is not myself. But I just want to perhaps ask two of them maybe. Ask that we consider alternatives in terms of our ability to manage in times like these and not put all our eggs in the NIC basket. So, Madam President, here is a suggestion I'd like to present. I think the purpose of Parliament is to pass legislation. And I think we could do well coming to this House to pass legislation that I would describe as fiscal responsibility legislation. Essentially, as a government, whether it is one party in office or another, to protect yourself for times like these. So you pass fiscal responsibility legislation. Now, what you want to call it, that's not my field. We've heard about sinking fund, lockbox, so let me not use those. They don't sound very popular these days. But you can call it whatever you want, but it needs to be something that allows you or prevents you from spending more than a certain amount of your revenue in any fiscal period. So if you collect $50 million or $100 million for a specific fiscal period, Madam President, you don't just go about, as they say, blasting all of the money, and then COVID-19 arrives, and you have nowhere to run but to NIC. So that fiscal responsibility legislation can protect the government, and there would be an alternative, somewhere you can tap in right now, and perhaps leave the NIC alone or minimize your dependence or dependency on the NIC. And I believe there are countries in the region who are actually doing so. I can mention Grenada. They have tried it, and I think it has assisted them in this time. So fiscal responsibility is that of the government. And I think that as a country, we cannot just rely on one method or something that we think is the panacea for everything. And I'm very concerned, Madam President, about the NIC at this time. Because when I look ahead in the next 30 years or so, I don't want to find myself being very nervous about whatever is in place for my benefits to be depleted in a time of crisis. So the government would need to consider that kind of action, and that if there is a fiscal responsibility legislation, the surpluses that you could accumulate over the years can go into some kind of fund, and it can be, you can call it a contingency account, Madam President. Again, I will leave the technical terms for the experts, but you can make sure that that is in place so that when these hurricanes and disasters and COVID and these things come along, before you go to NIC and make the whole country nervous, that there is some kind of contingency. Now, as I said earlier, there are certain terms that have been referred to, but we must practice it. We must not just talk about it. We must show that in every fiscal period, when we come to the budget, when we come to talk about our expenditure and so on, Madam President, that we are being responsible and we are taking those measures, even though nothing has happened, but we are taking those measures just in case we have a COVID-19 pandemic at our shores. Madam President, that comes with visionary leadership, responsible leadership, and not reactionary leadership. And I believe what we are experiencing now is a situation of reactionary leadership. So, Madam President, I believe that one of the things that must happen in all situations is that we must learn. We must learn from what is happening now. And one of the things we need to learn now is that the NIC needs to be sustainable. We must concern ourselves right now with the sustainability of the NIC. Because if we don't manage it well right now, we will pay a heavy price later. So while we decide that we must tap into it, we must ensure that we do so with a certain level of responsibility and caution. So that in that case, Madam President, our hardworking St. Lucians, most of whom contribute to the NIC, most of whom are now affected, and some of whom may not even be contributing to the NIC. We might want to revisit the way we deal with our labor laws so that we encourage or we cause more St. Lucians who are not paying NIC to feel that they need to. Because as we heard, some persons who do not contribute to NIC now may need the NIC contribution or the NIC funds to help them. And persons who do contribute may feel, well, it may not be fair. So as a government, as a people, we must re-educate our nation so that every single St. Lucian who makes $1, who is employed, finds it necessary or sees NIC contributions as not an option, but almost as an obligation. It is an investment I am making to protect myself. Because right now, Madam President, it looks like NIC contributions are almost optional. People pay who they want to pay, who doesn't want to pay. Some employees sometimes cannot even account. So we must educate our people so that they take that responsibility, making the NIC more viable, strengthening it, so that, as I said, when I get older, I will not be so nervous in times of crisis. Madam President, I want to wrap up by saying that if those kinds of proactive measures are taken, if that kind of leadership is demonstrated, it will be for the betterment, as they say, or for the good of the country. And it will cause us to be less reactive. And so, if that is done, Madam President, I think our people will be less nervous, they will be less concerned about their financial security, and they wouldn't have to worry about possible pay cuts or anything like that. And they would focus on what they have to do, because they know that there are measures in place should crisis comes. We may not be able to solve all their problems, but they know there is somewhere we can tap. There is an alternative to assisting the government and themselves to recover and to manage, and not just going and dumping everything or expecting everything to come from our one little NIC. With this, Madam President, I'd like to end my contribution.
Senator Auger.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, fellow senators. Good afternoon. Madam President, allow me to associate with the comments made earlier regarding commendations to our army of frontline workers who have done such a remarkable job to keep this crisis under control. I would also like to join others in offering sympathies to St. Lucians here and abroad who have lost friends and particularly family, and the thought that such persons may pass alone and lonely in their homes or in hospitals without a caring hand or a friendly face is particularly daunting, I think, for any of us who has a heart. We should also acknowledge the success of our country and our leadership in achieving a zero rating on deaths, particularly human life being a sacred commodity, and on full recovery of all our cases so far. Most of us, Madam President, are concerned about the next wave, if, when, and how big it may happen, and I imagine that this is our greatest national concern as we contemplate what happens to our tourism industry in the next few weeks and in opening the country, which is an inevitable development at some stage if we are to return to normalcy. What protocols will be in place as we invite persons back to our shores. Having said that, Madam President, by way of introduction, I would like to offer some comments on the current proposal before us, the matter of the amendment of the NIC Act, which senators may recall I mentioned at our last sitting that we would be here again very soon, and Leader of Government Business rose to ask what I meant, and I explained that I imagined that we would be here again to debate the matter of amending the NIC Act to allow for support to persons in need. At that time and now, Madam President, I fully expected that and continue to expect that we would act in a manner which is upright and principled. Because in times of crisis, as this is, the only fundamental on which we can rely is principle. Principle is defined as fundamental truth. Fundamental truth that serves as a foundation for belief, for behavior, and for reasoning. And in times of crisis, Madam President, we return to our foundations, we return to our principles, because situations are fluid and they are changing, as we have noted in this House, by the day, by the minute, by the hour, by the week. And so we must have some anchor to guide us through these times. And if we don't have that, then we tend to make bad decisions. So we need to anchor ourselves in principle. It's the only real hope we have as a nation and as a people. And as the people who are elected and appointed to this honorable House to safeguard the interests of the people, we have to try and bring clarity and calm to the nation at a time when many people are worried about many things. And we cannot calm them with rhetoric and throwing stones from our glass houses, as I have used that metaphor before, but with a return to principle and truth and information that is credible and understandable. And this should guide our belief and our behavior and our reasoning. The people of St. Lucia are looking to us in this Senate to give them calm, to give them peace, not just in the next few days, but in the next few months. It is highly likely that we will not see the end of this crisis until the end of the year. If we are that fortunate, we should count our blessings. The fact is that we are in this current state, I think, for at least 90 days. And we should not be expecting to go to fete or beach or party or bar anytime soon. The analogy which came to me at the first meeting which the Prime Minister called, well, the first meeting I attended which the Prime Minister called at Harbour Club one Sunday afternoon when this all began, the analogy that came to me was, when you cut off the head of the serpent, the tail will continue to wiggle for some time, and that tail may have a sting attached to it. So we need to brace ourselves for the long run and make sensible decisions about the matters before us. So we need to have clarity, Madam President, and I'm not sure that we're always contributing to that in the minds of the St. Lucian people. So let us try and deal with clarity, and let us try and deal with principle. The people of St. Lucia are worried about many things: salaries, pensions, their benefits, bonds, contributions, taxes, allowances, their insurances, their mortgages, their jobs, their debts, food, tourism, and a host of other perils which arise from this hurricane we call COVID. So the least we can do here today is to bring them some peace and bring some rational calm to the conversation. The principle of this matter, Madam President, is that the NIC, first established as the National Provident Fund, is the sole custodian of 5 decades of people's money. Established in 1970, we're in 2020. 5 decades. half a century of St. Lucian savings. And many of us have been handing over every day, every month of our working lives, we've been handing money to the NIC. We didn't have a choice. It's required by law. And as has been mentioned in the debate earlier today, for some of us, that is all we have. Especially in the post-CLICO collapse, many people lost their life savings and are still waiting for justice. Let that not be our story. The NIC is an institution of compulsory saving. It is not an option. Under penalty of law, employer and employee are required to put money into that trust. We have allowed people to be irresponsible, to treat it as an option, to pay as they wish or not at all, and then now the public purse, the government, the state must pay the price, pay the piper. Well, the public should also call the tune. The National Provident Fund is a system where both employer and employee put money aside for later. You notice that there is no mention of the government making any contribution to that fund. The National Provident Fund receives 5% from employer and 5% from employee. Still no mention of the government. It says on the first page of the NIC website, these funds will be accumulated at the fund and paid with interest when the worker makes a legitimate claim. This is more than a mission statement. This is a sacred promise to invest the resources of the people and then to faithfully return those resources to the people. They have been entrusted to the NIC. It's not an option, it's not a choice, it is required by law. So let us be reminded that the NIC is a creature of the state, which means it is the trust of the people and it is not an arm of the government. And that is why it has an independent board. And that is why it has an independent board to which persons are appointed in a specific way to safeguard the national trust which has been placed in the NIC. The people on that board are principled people, Madam President. I know them to be responsible people. They are not reckless. I know them to be consummate professionals, many of them with impeccable records and impeccable credentials. So I ask myself, why then? This incompleteness of information regarding this proposed fund, and I believe that the amendment is fraught with uncertainty, and it is an uncertainty which can easily be clarified if we go about it the right way. There is uncertainty, for example, and it has been mentioned before, so this is not news. There is uncertainty about how much, there is uncertainty about how long, there are no regulations laid, and I know that normally comes after, but these are not normal times, and this is not our money. This is not our money. There are no controls which are mentioned, financial controls that is, and there is no actuarial report. And this was mentioned in the lower house as well, but we're not supposed to dwell on that. There's no impact assessment which has been presented, nor any word thereof, no guarantee about the state of finances of the NIC subsequent to this largesse and this generosity. There are no hedge provisions. Hedge provisions refer to what you do to balance off what you are proposing to do now so that you mitigate risk, you reduce the risk to the fund, you reduce the risk to its subscribers. We have heard also that it may be 3 months, it may be 6 months. We understand the uncertainty of the timing on this thing. Nobody has a crystal ball on COVID. We understand also that it may be 35 million, 50 million, 100 million, it may be once, it may be twice. Madam President, that is not principled planning. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable to the subscribers who have been putting money into the NIC for 40 and 50 years of their life. And this brings no clarity to the people of St. Lucia who own this money and who need to be defended from anyone who would seek to undermine their future pensions on which they must rely in dire circumstances at times of health and age, domestic uncertainty, abandonment by children, termination of remittances from abroad, a host of perils which we will all face if we are lucky to get to that ripe old age. So we need a mechanism, Madam President, which is a worthy mechanism for the very worthy and noble and important principle that we are trying to address here, which is bringing relief to people who are in dire need. But that money has been taken from the pay packets of employees and from the revenues of employers, from the dividends of shareholders who could have kept it for themselves, all of whom agreed in 1970 to be partners in the future sustenance and sustainability of this country and its workers. And this is a sacred trust under penalty of law, under threat of imprisonment for non-compliance. So whatever dire straits the country may be in now, let us return to principle in what we are doing, and let us remember why the NIC exists and the principles that have kept it intact so far. Let us not heap more disaster on ourselves. COVID will do plenty of that for us. As a matter of principle, let us begin by commending the authors of the paperwork in front of us. Let us commend them for putting in place two important criteria. One, that a pandemic must exist, and that pandemic cannot be declared by anybody locally, but by a respected World Health Organization, which is presumably immune to island politics. And the second criteria is that at least 30% of contributors must be affected. Those are two objectively verifiable criteria which no politician will have control of, hopefully. Let us also commend the authors of the legislation for making it a criminal offense to try and elicit funds from this facility by way of false declaration. I am for that. But beyond that, Madam President, I must express several serious concerns which I hope are shared by all the responsible legislators in this room. First of all, the amount at stake. It cannot, under any circumstances, be appropriate to be casual or cavalier about the size of this facility. There has to be a cap. There has to be a dollar amount. Nobody signs a check and leaves the amount to be filled in. That is not appropriate. Filled in by whom? Filled in when? Filled in for what? Madam President, that is not acceptable. There has to be a cap. This is not our money. This is not a department of government. This is not a ministry budget. This is the earnings of 50 years of St. Lucian citizens put into trust under a board. And you know, there's a reason why the board is so construed, because the architects of the National Provident Fund knew full well the temptation that a pool of resources of that magnitude would have for ministers of finance, that they would be attracted to it every night and unaccountable for it by day. And so the provisions of the Act sought to insulate the NIC from that sort of interference, and we must not now frustrate that. It is not the responsibility of the NIC to anticipate or to compensate for the cash flow problems of the government. It is not. and no amount of arguing will make me think that it is. So, Madam President, it is therefore the responsibility of the NIC, and I think my quarrel is really the NIC. It is not necessarily with the Minister of Finance, who is looking for money wherever he can get it. My quarrel is with the NIC, because you are the keepers and the custodians of these funds, and you need to put in place measures which are sufficiently stringent, that they prevent, that they guide, that they control the beady little eyes of people who are broke, including subscribers who are tempted to defraud, who may be tempted to defraud or to otherwise make false claims. It is the fiduciary responsibility of the NIC to apply internationally acceptable standards, prudential guidelines, actuarial science, to determine what is the quantum of money that can be made safely available for this cause. And we need to see that in this House, Madam President, that the NIC board has done an assessment of its assets, liquid and illiquid, short-term and long-term, and can say to the people of St. Lucia whose money they're responsible for, we have done the math, and we can afford to spare X dollars, and this is how we are going to make the X dollars available, over what period of time and for what purposes. Let us not do a right thing in the wrong way. We must have an actuarial science that is applied to this, which is where the people who are qualified to do the projections sit and look at the impact of such a financial gesture on the future obligations of NIC and its ability to meet those obligations to the people who have entrusted their money to them. We now turn to the source of the funds. Where are these monies coming from? Is it from reserves? And that question was asked on Tuesday. I listened to the debate for most of the while. I did not hear a response. I hope that there is a response. And again, my quarrel is with the NIC. The NIC should have a response to this, and it should be in the public domain by now, because it is public money. Where do the resources come from? Is it from reserves? Is it from cash flow? Which I doubt, because at $90 million a year, that's only about $8 million a month. Is it coming from profits? Is it returns on investments? This has to be disclosed. It has to be disclosed because each of those sources has a different set of future implications for subscribers. And that's the only people we are accountable to. If it is reserves, then we might well establish an unemployment fund that we've been talking about for the longest while. Because if the NIC is sitting on $80 or $100 million that it can afford to give away on short-term notice, then the unemployment fund that we have been debating and have not had the fortitude or forthrightness to establish all these many years, then we could establish it tomorrow. Because what we are talking about here today is an unemployment benefit. So instead of creating an economic disaster fund, or whatever we propose to call it, create the unemployment benefit, because that is what you are trying to achieve. What is this roundabout mechanism when you can go directly to just add another category of benefit to the existing benefits which are already in the legislation? It would be so much simpler, so much more translucent, so much easier to manage. You just add another benefit called an unemployment benefit. You allocate a percentage of your resources to that benefit, and it becomes part of the standard operations of the NIC, and not some exceptional mechanism to be invoked when, if, or not. That is what our problem is. We have thousands of people who are unemployed or who have lost a significant proportion of their income. And on that point, Madam President, I would like to say that I do not see, in fact, I would like elucidation as to whether or not one has to be totally unemployed to benefit from this. Because it seems to me that there are some people who have lost a percentage of their income and who have become just as unviable as people who have lost everything. So if somebody is working half as often, it will still put their mortgage in jeopardy. It will still put their rent in jeopardy, which is a mortgage for somebody else. It will still put their children's education and nutrition in jeopardy. It will put their vehicle and house insurance in jeopardy. So why do we not have, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a mechanism by which somebody whose income is only partially affected would be able to benefit under this proposal? Because that is what we do when somebody's unhealthy. The employer pays on a percentage, and the NIC pays a percentage. And so the burden, the financial burden of the mechanism is shared, as it should be, between employer and employee and the fund. And this is what we should be seeking to achieve, because that is the principle that has sustained us these 50 years from National Provident Fund to NIC. So I do not understand why we are creating this whole new vehicle to arrive at the same destination and on a longer route when we could have a shorter route by just adding an unemployment benefit. And the same applies to the matter of the health benefit, which again we have been debating forever and we have not had the temerity to implement. Let us do the right thing. Let us do the right thing, and we will not find ourselves with our backs against the wall every time there is a crisis. We throw our hands up in the air and we start scrambling for money wherever we can pluck it. If the money is to come from the cash flow, Madam President, at such short notice, then it is also possible that the NIC is underpaying benefits as it now stands, because you cannot be sitting on $80 million or $100 million. There's such that you have liquidity to respond to a short-term crisis, which is not in your mandate, and yet you cannot create the health insurance benefit or the unemployment benefit. Something is wrong with those figures, and I would certainly like clarity on that. Why not, therefore, create these benefits, which we have discussed ad infinitum, but they seem to be lying in a grave of silence? If it is profits on investments that the NIC is getting this money from, then it is still a diversion. It is a diversion of subscribers' resources, and it needs to be deposited where it belongs so that it can translate into current or future benefits for subscribers. Heaven knows you can't bury anybody on that funeral grant they're giving you. So why have we kept the funeral grant at the paltry sum that it is for years infinitum, and we are sitting on $80 million, which we can make available in a matter of 2 weeks? Something is wrong. And so we are back to square one. Let us discuss what the impact of the funds might be, of this funding might be. There's no actuarial report, so we have no assumptions to go on. But we should know that this must have some future implications. This sudden generosity, this largesse, must have some implications. And there are many possible implications. Higher contributions later, raising the retirement age to compensate, lower benefits because we have to find where this adjustment is going to fall, or, as I mentioned earlier, we have not improved the benefits to subscribers as we should have if we have that kind of liquidity in the system. So, what is it going to be? I am too far from retirement, and I would like to know if I have to sustain myself for another 5 or 10 or 15 years, and then maybe 2 days before my funeral I'll get something. God knows I have enough holes in my coffin as it is. So let us decide now what is the principal thing to do. And while we're on the subject, Madam President, is it correct, and I ask the question without prejudice, is it correct that we have not seen the annual report of the NIC for the last 2 years? It was mentioned that the last report tabled was 2017, in which case the NIC is ultra-virus, it's operating outside of its authority, and it is in violation of the act which created it. And I repeat, I know the NIC to be governed by a set of principled professionals. So why is this lax approach to the business of the NIC? I do not understand, and I would like to be enlightened. In terms of, again, the funding, Madam President, when we do not start from principle, we could become lost, we become entangled in our own schemes. If this is not a health benefit, and if it is not an unemployment benefit, thank God it's not a funeral benefit, then it is a disguised loan to the government. And that is not the business of the NIC. If the NIC needs to make cash flow available to the government, then buy the bonds that the government is afraid they are not going to roll over. Some 700 million, I believe, is coming due if the figures touted are correct. Then the NIC could buy bonds from the government. If the NIC bought bonds from the government, it would solve some of the bond problems, and it would also provide the government with immediate cash flow. It would shore up the creditworthiness of the government so that default does not become such a looming specter on the horizon. And it would also show up as an investment on the balance sheet of the NIC. Right now, this is going to look like an exceptional expenditure on the balance sheet of the NIC, for which there is no future return, as far as I understand it from the documents that are in front of us. And that is not in keeping with the mandate, the spirit, or the legislation which should govern the NIC. So right now, we're looking like an ostrich with our head in the sand and our vital parts exposed. As hard as it may be, I think it would be preferable and more transparent to let the government borrow the funds from the NIC. If this is an economic measure, then there's nothing wrong with that. You can either do it by the bonds, or you can do it by a direct loan from the NIC, in which case, as I said, it shows up as an asset in the books of the NIC. Right now, it is very unclear as to what it's going to show up as. And I understand that the Minister of Finance does not want to have this above the line, as we say in public accounting, where it shows up as further indebtedness. But these are exceptional times. And I believe the IMF or the World Bank, looking at the national income statistics or at the government finances, will understand that these are exceptional times, and you could have an exceptional facility created by the NIC or through the NIC, which is in fact a long-term, low-interest loan to the government. But it will be the proper way to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that arrangement, even if it's at a low interest rate of, say, 2%, which is better than you can borrow on the market. We've been approving things in here at 1.5% above LIBOR. So if we have resources available in the country, by all means make them available under these circumstances, but do it the right way. Do not let this be the wrong way of doing the right thing. And there must be prudential guidelines. So the NIC should know how much of its assets, how much of the people's assets it has tied up with government paper, tied up in private investment, tied up in physical projects, tied up in other forms of capital, and it must balance the risk of the entire portfolio. And I do not see any of that logic reflected in the document we have before us. And regarding regulations, Madam President, which I mentioned earlier, I don't think that I don't think any minister has business making regulations for this facility. I think the investment committee of the NIC or somebody like that, which is removed from the crisis, the financial crisis of the government, should be making those regulations. And if again, the regulations are made under the main act, then the investment committee or other suitable committee of the NIC would be charged with managing the process and the daily access of those funds. Let us say we create this fund with $100 million or whatever, and there is no sunset clause as has been mentioned, and we draw down 80 million of it and there's 20 million left. What happens to it? Does it go back to the NIC? Is it available in yet another box, locked or unlocked, that the people of Senator will not know about? That's subscribers' money. And again, there has to be more specifics in the matter before us so that we know what we are doing and how we are using up these funds. And so this is what happens when we stray away from fundamental principles. But if we went back to the original act, and I don't know how many people have done that, and we looked at the spirit as well as the law, that brought the NIC into existence, I do not think that this is what we would be proposing, this particular type of mechanism we would be proposing in this House today. And hats off to Honorable Stevenson King, who in his presentation tried his best to give some objective picture of the rationale of the NIC without breaking ranks, of course, but he even went so far as to suggest that the matter should be reviewed in committee, and nothing happened. But he was on the same path, Madam President. He was on the same path that some of these things need to be fixed. Let this not be the wrong way of doing the right thing. And some of us know full well that it is not the right way, but we will pass it because it's late and because we are desperate. Again, we are desperate because the people are starving. But this is exactly why the people are starving, because we do desperate things at desperate times instead of taking the long-range, principled approach to our problems and making sure that we come out at the other end better off. It is possible to come out at the other end better off. And if I can quote the Honorable Prime Minister, why waste a good crisis? You have emergency powers, you can enact legislation, you can make provisions, establish the unemployment fund. How long would that take in terms of legal drafting? And we've been discussing this since our last meeting in this House, or at least I hope we have, because I certainly brought it up. Establish the unemployment fund now, and then you have a permanent mechanism which addresses permanent problems, because the unemployment is not going anywhere. But it also makes people responsible for themselves, so that you know from the time you are making contributions to the NIC, you are insuring yourself against health, you are insuring yourself against sudden loss of income, you are insuring yourself for future years by way of pension, and you're even insuring yourself to make sure that your body gets buried somewhere decent at the end of your life. This is what we need to be doing, making people responsible for their own lives, instead of government coming in with a bailout every 5 minutes, a gouvernement porte sabao, and people have to sit on the side of the road with their children and suffer the indignity of a handout. This is not how you build a nation. Do you know what it is for a child to recover from that image of sitting hungry on the side of the road waiting for a van to pass with a massy bag? You cannot recover from the psychological damage of that. And it is time for us to stop putting our people in that position. We're always thinking that we will remain poor forever. Why? Why do we think we will remain poor forever? There is a better way. And there is precedent for this, Madam President. In the United States, there are mechanisms like your 401k, which you can draw against. So it is your retirement fund. It's not l'argent gouvernement. It is not the NIC's money. It is your retirement fund. And you get a statement every month that tells you this is what you have put away, this is how it has grown, this is what we have for you, and these are your options of drawing it down. And so for the middleman, that is the middle-sized man, because we think about the bottom, we think about the top, and we don't often think about the middle, but there are a lot of St. Lucians in the middle who could probably take an advance on whatever their accumulated benefit is. So if you know your pension fund is $80,000, you can take 20 of it now. No, you will not take all, because then you will become a burden on the state, and I don't want that. You will not be allowed to fall victim to your own stupidity. You can take a maximum of maybe 25% because you are in exceptional times, which could be sickness, which could be fire, which could be divorce, which could be disease. You can take a maximum, use it to deal with immediate circumstances, and it would be taxable. So the government would get revenue because it is non-taxable when it goes in, and if it comes out early, it is taxable. But moreover, when things improve, you can put it back. So you can build back your pension, your personal, responsible pension, back to where it is by scrunting a little bit in the good years and building back your pot of reserves for when you retire. This is what responsible government does. You encourage people to do better for themselves. So Let us take the hard decisions, Madam President, from a principled decision. And as I said, let us not do the right thing in the wrong way. I suggest, therefore, that we meet in committee to restructure the legislation, to create an unemployment benefit. Some of it is semantics, because the intention is good. It is the mechanism that is wrong. And at the same time, we can find a model for establishing the health benefit along similar lines. And then it will be based on percentages. Your entitlement will be based on percentages of your own contribution to your own welfare. So I'm just referring to my notes, Madam President, if you will bear with me. Many people would agree, even on this side, that John Compton was something of a visionary. Rest his imperfect soul. He understood the importance of public savings. And Madam President, at the bottom of this problem is our lack of public sector savings. We have been profligate. And I'm pointing all fingers in all directions. We have been profligate with the resources of the country. And it is because we have zero public sector savings that we are at war with our teachers today. That we paid salaries out here by the skin of our teeth, either yesterday or today. That cannot be our situation 40 years after independence. That is madness. And we have to stop that. I remember I was a junior economist in this very building, under this very floor where the lounge is today. And John Compton, as Minister of Finance and Planning at the time, which was a sensible structure of things until we got really crazy, insisted that 10% of recurrent revenue must go to public savings. And that 10% would be our contribution on any capital project we were contemplating, because we could not go to donors with nothing and ask for 100% of the money for any project. That was not respectable, that was not a position that a nation should be in, that you must go cap in hand every time with nothing to bring to the table. And he said, you must have something. So we need to return to the days of public sector savings. This living hand to mouth of people and government has to end. So, Madam President, do you need a moment, Madam President? No? Okay. In this soca and segment society we love so much, see how COVID has caused us to exist without rum. See how we have managed, through you, Madam President, to our Minister for National Security, see how we have managed to close our borders against human trafficking. Why can't we close our borders to drugs? See how we have managed to close our borders against tourists. Why can't we close them to guns? See how we have rediscovered what it is to be in our homes with our families. See how we have returned to fundamental values of community and caring. See how a carnival band can turn its creative energies to making 1,000 reusable masks for the medical community. Thank you, Tribe of 12. I have to give shout out to my constituency now. Frontline medical workers. So far we have delivered 850 masks to them, and we have the 150 last lap to go. And it will be done by the end of the week. And thank you to the people who have joined with us to make this possible. So we can do it. We can do it. But we have to take the right decisions in the right manner. And thank God COVID-19 has brought us to this brink. Let us not do the right thing the wrong way. When times are good and taxes are rolling in, put some money away. When we are young and fetting till morning and mashing up the place, Put some money away. When we are frisky and fertile and making children like peas, put some money away. We must require everyone by law, including the government, it was mentioned earlier, including the self-employed, to put some money away when times are good. Put some of that fat and fried chicken money away for the hard times, because as black people, we're supposed to know that hard times and down times and sick times are coming. So let us find ourselves better off at the end of this crisis. Do not use the poor and the desperate as an excuse to justify going about this the wrong way. We are a nation of 40 years, Madam President. At some stage, principle must reign and recklessness must stop. Thank you.
Senator Mangal.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As I stand, Madam President, to support the amendment to the National Insurance Corporation bill, Madam President, I must say that we have to understand the context in which we are doing this, and the National Insurance Corporation have actually come to the assistance of the people of this country, Madam President. This amendment to the NIC legislation does not stand alone, but it's going to be fitted within the general context of the entire piece of legislation itself, Madam President. And what is more important is that we have to understand that this is not just a situation that exists for St. Lucia alone, or this is not just a situation that we have. This is unprecedented, Madam President. This is something we have not seen in our entire lifetime here. None of us have seen this situation. And so it became very fitting and very necessary for the NIC to come to the assistance of the people of this country, Madam President. And by virtue of the very legislation itself, economic relief program, it says that 30% of persons have to be affected by what is called a pandemic. The last time we had a pandemic, I think it was the year 1918. And so that is over 100 years, Madam President. So this is very unprecedented. And of course, the NIC board, in its wisdom, have sought it fit to come to the assistance of the very persons who are making contributions to a pension fund, Madam President. And therefore, I must applaud the board for doing just so. Because this has been considered, this was considered by the NIC by very competent people. And so they would have taken into consideration every aspect of that particular fund and the impact that it will have long-term on the pension funds of persons, Madam President. And we've heard that the NIC has not submitted a report. Here, the last one was 2017, Madam President. And so it is due. Let me read from the NIC Act, Section 24 of the Act, Actuarial Review. It says the board shall, with the assistance of an actuary approved by the minister, review the operations of this act at the end of the year 2000 and thereafter not later than every 5th year. So that's every 5 years, Madam President. And in such review, make a report to the minister on the financial condition of the fund and the actuary or otherwise of the contingency.
Senator Ogier.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I believe the reference was to the annual report of the NIC, not the actuarial report. Although an actuarial report was cited as being needed for this matter, but the matter of not laying before the House was the annual report of the NIC as
First of all,
required under the
please let
Act.
me know what you're rising on.
On a point of clarification.
Senator Mangal.
Okay, Madam President. Okay, but so basically there may be the situation of the annual report not being submitted, but the actual report is certainly not it's not due as yet, basically. So a lot of reference was made to that particular actuary report or to know the status of the NIC through its actuaries. Madam President, but what has got us to this point? You see, you cannot plan today for today. And I agree with that. I agree with the senator from Miku South saying that. You don't go AA and just plan for today. And that is why this government in its vision, Madam President, when it came into office, had a fund, a reserve fund, Madam President. And when we left office in 2011, there was $200 million, Madam President. $200 million in a reserve fund with the ECCB. What happened to that fund, Madam President? By 2013, the Labour Party government wiped out that fund. That fund was wiped out. So if we had that $200 million today, Madam President, with an exogenous shock in our economy and to our people, this government would have been in a much better position to be able to provide support and assistance for the people in this country. When we came back, Madam President, in 2016, zero. And I would like to challenge the opposition. Show me within the 15 years that the government has been of the Labour Party was in power. In the 15 years, 1 cent that was deposited by their government within what is a sinking fund. Not one, Madam President.
That's right.
In the last 20 years, we're talking about planning. In the last 20 years, 15 years on the Labour Party government, 5 years on the UWP government. We are here. Who should have done the majority of the planning towards economic support for the people of this country?
That's right.
Who should have done it? But then we didn't stop there, Madam President. We're back into office, and now we do have a sinking fund with $25 million in it. So we started back again, Madam President. We started back again. And I must applaud this government and the National Insurance Corporation with the vision of coming forward with the National Health Plan to be under the NIC. And I believe as a businessman, I would say that we need to create an entity where we have an economic unemployment facility for the people of our country. And I'm certain that our persons contributing will not mind paying a little bit extra for us to be able to have those facilities. So bravo to the NIC, bravo to the board for coming to the support of this government. And of course, I support this government 100% with the foresight it has in controlling this virus, in dealing with this virus and dealing with the support and to cushion the effect that our people is having. I thank you, Madam President.
Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, Justice and National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to support this bill to amend the NIC legislation. During my lifetime, we have never had such displacement of workers that has occurred. It is unprecedented, and a government that is struggling to pay its debts and salaries would have had to devise a way to assist those individuals. We know why I have to tell you that. We must congratulate the board of the NIC. And remember, it is the board of the NIC that pointed out to the Honorable Prime Minister that they could find a way to assist the persons who are contributors to the NIC, but are now facing difficult times. These are their people. It's important to know that the law that informs the actions of the NIC does not speak to an unemployment benefit. It is therefore necessary to find a mechanism to achieve what they're trying to do. The board members are compassionate people because compassion is all-inclusive. Compassion knows no boundaries. Compassion comes with awareness, and awareness breaks all narrow territories. It is because of that compassion that the board looked beyond the law and wanted to find a way to break this narrow mandate of the NIC. And this is where we are coming, and the Prime Minister has talked about it, that he is going forward in looking to provide an unemployment benefit and a national health insurance for our people. They looked closely and were able to see clearly a way to be kind to their fellow man. It must also be made clear that the monies of the NIC is for the pensions of its contributors, and that is its primary objective. The actual report indicates that by 2050, the funds of the NIC may be depleted. During the tenure of the Labour Party, it found it necessary, along with the director of the NIC at the time, to increase the age of pension from 55 to 65, a gap of 10 years. I want to remind police officers, prison officers, and fire officers that it was the Labour Party that removed them from the government pension scheme and gave them to be involved with the NIC. 10 years, this 10-year gap has created two problems. One, an officer who has to retire at 55 has to wait for 10 years to receive any money. What does that police officer or prison officer do? He has to go and look for a job, and by the time he's 65, he's old and feeble and cannot even enjoy his pension. The second problem is that between the years of 55 and 65, those 10 years, those persons who have retired cannot and do not contribute anything to the NIC, nothing whatsoever. So you have almost 50 persons living almost at the same time, and that is 50 people who had to contribute before are not going to be contributing to the NIC for 10 years. Isn't that a burden on the NIC? So this government, or any future government, and I'm praying that my government would do it, that we need to look at areas of the age of retirement. Barbados allows its officers to go to the age of 65, and the pension age is 67, just a mere gap of 2 years. So we have to look at this. It was said here that the NIC board is one of the best boards. They are competent people. They know the individuals personally, men of character. There's transparency, accountability, and prudent development practices. This is what we describe the members of the board as, you know. And then we are in the same breath indicating that those persons may be irresponsible for assisting their own contributors. The points are good. This is a pandemic. On the way forward, we have to look at other ways of sustaining the NIC. And the Prime Minister in his address particularly spoke about it, the unemployment benefit. He has been touting the National Insurance scheme. And these are two of the projects that I am sure that the Honorable Prime Minister, with the help of his cabinet, will institute. So I want to applaud the members of the board of the NIC for being compassionate and taking care of their members. And I do hope that when history is recorded, that the members of that board will be commended and remembered. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm happy that Senator Oje brought up the issues in reference to ensuring that we have something like a sinking fund or some form of, reassurance or finance so that we can support our people at times of distress. And I'm happy that Senator Mangal clarified where some of those problems arose. And of course, Madam President, I want to say that we have to be careful because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, Madam President. And I have said in this House over and over, let us please put the politics aside. On many occasions, Madam President, I have said that. But then, some of us who claim not to have any political ambitions or, interests, I see, it seems everybody turns political when they get into this house. Because, Madam President, I know that all of us have lived through the times that we are referring to, and all of us know the politics, and we understand it. We know Sir John started the National Provident Fund, and he had a lot of opposition from the opposition at the time. We know that it has been an uphill battle for this administration to set up anything good that is going to protect the people. Millennium Highway, all kinds of things I can mention. But we don't want to go there at a time like that. Is this the time? Like my fellow senator said, is this necessary? Madam President, while we as ministers have a responsibility to provide answers to questions, I believe that questions should be fair and honest to begin with. I want to address some of the issues raised, Madam President, for fear that if I do not, even if we are running out of time, that I might be accused of just not answering people's questions. So, Madam President, I want to say that the legislation says, Economic Relief Program 65A, subject to this act, the board may establish an economic relief program where 40% of more insured people, and so on and so forth. So this is not mandatory. But this legislation is making it, this amendment is making it possible in case the board decides to come along and assist its own contributors, Madam President. We are talking as though these people came out of nowhere and government is trying to help people and so on and so forth. But it is not the case. These are people who contribute to that fund, to NIC. And it is their money that NIC is going to take now to assist themselves. Madam President, are we going to say people should go without food? These are unemployed people, Madam President. People who have found themselves unemployed as a result of COVID. It is not people who are partially employed. You have to be completely and totally unemployed for you to benefit from this fund. And it says there clearly, and there are recommended penalties if you make a false claim. And a lot of the questions I heard being asked, the legislation, the amendment answers those questions. An insured person shall make a claim for economic relief in the prescribed form and manner. If you want to see the prescribed form and manner, say so. And then again, that will be up to NIC to provide it. But it is not this House, Madam President, that is going to provide the prescribed form and manner. We cannot give you everything here. The rate for a payment under an economic relief program is the prescribed percentage of the insured person's relevant earnings. Everyone has their own amount of relevant earnings. So I may have paid more than you. It is a percentage. So there is a formula, Madam President. So I think if we look at the legislation carefully, we will see that it is answering most, if not all, of our questions. Madam President, let me say that the NIC, people pay contributions to the NIC, Madam President, and the government contributes half of that. Those funds are pooled, and they accumulate, they attract interest. The NIC board also invests those funds so that they bring a profit for the owners of the fund. That is the profit in most cases, Madam President, that is reinvested, that is loaned, and sometimes grants are made out of those profits. We get scholarships given to children of those people who contribute to the fund. So it is not like we are taking the pensioners' money, using it up, and then they will not have any at a time when they claim. That is not the case, Madam President. We have people who manage the NIC funds, And I do not think that these people will be so irresponsible for them to take NIC funds and give it to persons who are unemployed, their own people, and at the same time, leave these people without a pension when the time comes. Obviously, they would have calculated that. And the funds that they are expanding ought to be funds that they are able to expand. We also have the NIC Act, Madam President, and any expenditure of those funds is guided by the NIC Act. So, Madam President, I really don't understand all the politics that is surrounding this. In terms of the retirement age, Madam President, and I'm hearing, oh, I wish I could just tell them, give me something. The retirement age, Madam President, was based on an actuarial study. It was not by this government, you know. It is not this administration that decided to increase the age. And like my fellow senator said, 10 years, no pay, no benefits. And a lot of people became paupers, Madam President, public servants. Exactly. When I was at CSA, they would come to me. Some people had to give up their homes, lost their mortgage, and went back to live with their
Leader
parents.
of government business, let's get back to the debate at hand and move along, please.
Yes, Madam President, we're talking about the NIC funds, NIC pension, Madam President. And this is why I say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Madam President, this is not the only thing that the government of St. Lucia is offering to the people of St. Lucia as a response to the COVID pandemic. We have an unemployment relief. That is what we are looking at from NIC. People will be getting their contributors, Madam President, who have now become unemployed, will be getting between $500 and $1,500 over the next 3 months period. That, of course, will be reassessed based on what happens. We have commencement of duty-free barrels concessions starting in June. We have discussion with insurance companies to provide assistance to affected persons. Extension of corporate tax installment payments. We have government assistance to local entrepreneurs in providing COVID assistance in the form of PPEs in the tune of $7.4 million. We have a national meals program covering 5,000 people. We have tax credit to companies and other entities who retain at least 30% of their staff. We are putting price gouging legislation in place to protect consumers. Government is waiving interest and penalties on all tax types for March. That includes VAT payment and personal income tax. There is an extension of time for filing income tax returns by 1 month. Government has engaged the utility companies and continues to do so as we speak to assist those who have suffered job loss. Government, in consultation with our financial institutions, are looking at ways and means of assisting those with mortgages and loans. Madam President, these are just some of the measures, other measures, that we have put in place. And what are we hearing today? Government has no money, so they are coming to loan money from NIC to help their people. Madam President, that is so far from the truth. When senators inquire about a deficit budget, who introduced deficit budgeting in St. Lucia? We all know from '97. The sinking
Madam
fund.
President,
Senator Henry.
45.
This is why up to
Madam
today,
President,
Madam
point of order.
President.
Senator, point of order. Madam President, the member.
What point of order is the member standing on?
35-2, Madam.
What's that?
35.
Yes, Madam.
What's that? 35 is what?
Madam President, the
Please,
member, Madam President.
1 minute, Senator Henry. Leader of government business, please. Senator Henry.
Madam President, the member is actually misleading by stating that.
Senator Henry, please, I want to know what standing order is being infringed.
Madam President, I indicated 45-3, Madam President.
Madam 35-3.
Madam President, sorry, for the 6A, Madam President, for the 6A. Madam President, the member for government business indicated that person...
You rose on a point of order. Where are you taking me to? Which order is being infringed?
Madam President, for the 6E.
No, that's the point of order. You're rising on a point of order, but you need to tell me which one is being infringed.
Madam President, the member is misleading the House. She's misleading the House in the debate, Madam President.
36A takes you to a point of order that is being infringed, an order that is being infringed. Which one?
Madam President, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, last of all, let me say, this is not unprecedented, Madam President. There are many countries with retirement agencies where government turn to these agencies to loan funds from these agencies. I can tell you the government of Canada is always loaning millions of dollars from the National Insurance Company, from the National Insurance Fund, although that country has an unemployment insurance. So imagine us here in St. Lucia with no unemployment insurance. The very same people who contribute to that fund, we are now making legislation so that they can benefit from the fund. And we are getting so much opposition, Madam President, during a crisis, Madam President. So, Madam President, this is not unprecedented. This is not a first, and it surely will not be a last. So I am submitting this bill, Madam President, for approval in this honorable House.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the National Insurance Corporation Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the National Insurance Corporation Act, Cap 16.01.
Senators, we will take it clause by clause. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 3.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 5.
Insertion of new Part 5A.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 6.
Amendment of Section 82.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rise and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the National Insurance Corporation Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the National Insurance Corporation Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the National Insurance Corporation Amendment Act 2020.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment.
Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment. Madam President, the bill under consideration is the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act, Cap 1503, the Principal Act. Clauses 1 and 2 of the bill provide for the short title and interpretation as usual. Clause 3 of the bill provides for an amendment of Section 3 of the Principal Act, application for an approved development by deleting the words 31 March 2020 and by substituting the words to the 31st day of March 2021, thereby extending the application period for an approved development for an additional year. Clause 4 of the bill provides for an amendment of paragraph G of Schedule 2 of the Principal Act, application for declaration of an approved development and for the grant of tax reliefs and exemptions by deleting the words 31 March 2020 and by substituting the words to the 31st day of March 2021, thereby extending the application period for an approved development for an additional year. Madam President, this amendment shows us that this amendment is to extend on the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Bill, the period for that bill, which ended a few weeks ago. And this is part of the reshaping exercise. It focuses on the accommodation sector and gives a range of incentives to investors. This gives our Attorney General and the drafting department, Madam President, additional time, or let's say breathing space, to re-engineer the various pieces of legislation. It also opens up the opportunity for our local business people and small business people to operate from this year until next year, while the Department of Legislative Drafting is putting together a more comprehensive piece of legislation to address some of these gaps. I present this bill to this Honorable House for consideration and approval, Madam President.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put... Senator Henry.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I stand to provide a perspective on this motion because it seeks to extend the period for the stimulus, the tourism stimulus package to facilitate persons participating in the business opportunities that this tourism business, I think, brings to our shores. And Madam President, it involves, I'm sure that the tourism stimulus investment includes a number of participants within the construction sector and other sectors that facilitate what would be happening, including persons submitting proposals to planning for approval and doing those regular stuff that persons do if they want to construct a hotel or get approval for a hotel. Madam President, as I speak to this, I want to reflect on this. I think there are times, Madam President, and I'm proceeding with much, trepidation and being careful, because there's nothing you could say in here today that is not being construed as being political, even when you speak and you support something that is being said, but you ask questions against it. And I find, Madam President, this does not, the opening remarks made very early of persons coming together and working together. Madam President, there's a high level of pretense in this chamber. And I do say, Madam President, persons on this side need to be able to let their nay be nay and the yea be nay, because, Madam President, the feeling is not, I'm not feeling comfortable, especially as we go about discussing this issue of this pandemic in St. Lucia, based on how the debate has taken place. But I know, Madam President, it's difficult, always difficult for the opposition to make their contribution. I have concluded this. But, Madam President, as I proceed, Madam President, with this, Madam President, there are a number of businesses associated with the tourism sector, some of whom are currently allowed to operate. I think persons involved in the construction of tourism plant, I think some I call them the people generating aggregates, I notice are moving aggregates across to some tourism sites or where construction activity is taking place. Madam President, some of them are asked to observe some protocols, but I also understood, Madam President, most of them, and I dare say the CPALs and CO Williams, the Renaults and them are operating to provide support. But there are some like Aaron Siwak who is asked not to. And I'm asking that we, as we approve those, extend the stimulus package for tourism, we are sending signals to the business sector, and we must ensure, Madam President, that everyone is treated in the same environment. We should not create a society where some people are being treated in one manner as against the other. This morning, Aaron Siwak was asked to close down, even after he satisfied everything in terms of his operations, of meeting the standards that were set by the Ministry of Health. 3 police officers came to his premises and asked him to close down. Yes, he had everything in place. The Ministry of Health visited him and everything. You understand? And of course, conveyed that to me even while I was here, to tell me that, look here, what is happening? I hear you all debating, but this thing is not working well.
Honorable Leader of Government Business?
Yeah.
Madam President, on a point of order, Madam President, the Honorable Senator is misleading the House. It is not the Ministry
Which one,
of
Madam
Health.
President?
It is not the Ministry of Health, Madam President, that gives the okay. It's the Ministry of
Senate,
Commerce.
Honorable Leader of
On a
Government
point of
Business.
elucidation, Madam President.
Senator Henry.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, we have authorities in terms of contributing, we subscribe to when, of course, for example, Madam President, when we dealt with COVID-19 and what declares it as a pandemic and we respond, we said WHO. There are other authorities as well that guide what we do. And of course, it's the proper thing to come here to do, to submit a piece of legislation for the tourism sector. It is the proper thing to do for us to consider it. And I understand why we need to do it. But there are other pieces of legislation, Madam President, that are also time-bound, that time-specific, that also need to be brought to this House. Madam President, legal pieces of persons who are in the courts dealing with matters, Madam President, that are time-specific. And I'm sure, Madam President, that these also need to be similarly be brought to this House so that whether we extend the period or give it the validity for it to continue, I think that is also necessary to be done. The COVID-19 has actually stopped time on us, so to speak, but there are issues that that time is running on, and I'm sure, whereas I cannot call them out, Madam President, but they too fit within the same framework of a stimulus package. And I do ask sometimes, Madam President, is there a sort of a special relationship with the tourism operatives and not the other sectors as well, because they too are important to the entire economy of St. Lucia. Madam President, I'll close on this, but just to remind us, as the lady of government business cited the children of Israel going down to the promised land. I just wanted her to remind us in this House that it was Pharaoh whose head was hard. And the persons who were speaking to Pharaoh, they were in the minority. As a matter of fact, it was just Moses and Aaron. And one characteristic that was mentioned about Moses is that he stuttered. So as we move, the minority is also important. Do not attempt to just shut us up just to proceed. The minority is important. And while we sit in minority and we try to convey, remember, as you rightly said, the children of Israel stayed a long time because the persons who advised Pharaoh were in the minority. And he had to take more than 9 plagues for him to have listened. I thank you very much. You'll have to close the parliament for 40 days. You don't remember that?
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Like I said in my, let me just clarify a little. When we gave the initial conditions upon which some people could have remained open, Madam President, one of the things we considered was the critical role that the St. Jude Hospital plays, and we allow for the St. Jude Hospital construction and so on to continue when we had after the first extension, not during the first 7 days, but after the first extension. And because we realized that given that COVID was a health issue, we probably would have needed to continue that hospital because we do not know, even in the long term, what we are going to be faced with. So we need to, with haste, continue so that we can complete the St. Jude Hospital in the south. Also for other reasons as well, the fact that the people have operated in that hospital which ought not to have been operating for a very long time, to give relief to the workers and the patients who are there as well. So, Madam President, I would like the Honorable Senator to bear that in mind. There is an SI that speaks to that. Also, as we continue to open up, we do attach protocols that the different entities must comply with, Madam President. And therefore, if you are not compliant, and you have to apply through the Ministry of Commerce, that is the ministry responsible for small businesses and so on, and trade. So you have to go through the Ministry of Commerce for you to get approval to operate, to open. The Ministry of Commerce is working together with the Ministry of Health to ensure that they have all the right protocols in place, and people also have to comply with the protocol. So even if you get permission to open from the Ministry of Commerce, and later on when during the monitoring process, they find out that you are not compliant, you will be closed down. Madam President, I just needed to clarify that. The bill itself is small. It's just an amendment to give us an additional 1 year, given that COVID may take away a few months of this facility, so that more people can enjoy what it is that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act has to offer. Thank you, Madam President.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act, Cap 15.03.
Senators, we'll take it clause by clause. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 3.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rise and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Tourism Stimulus Investment Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendment. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Act 2020.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. If I might indulge, Madam President, and ask of you, if you can give us some time to clap in recognition of our, before we adjourn, in recognition of our frontline workers. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned, signed and die.
Senator. Senator, are you on your feet? Senators, the question is the House do stand adjourned, signed and die. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as have a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.